Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Um, okay, so welcome to Medell's Expert Online, and our topic today is going to be music rehabilitation, supporting adults remotely. My name's Mary Kay Terrace. I am a rehabilitation manager here at headquarters in Innsbruck. So I'm the moderator today, but you don't want to listen to me. You're here because you want to listen to our two experts on the topic of music. So they're going to be talking about working with individuals who use hearing technology and have an interest in music, whether it be playing a musical instrument or just wanting to be able to enjoy music more. So I'm really looking forward to their presentations. They're going to be sharing their experiences, their knowledge, and suggestions for how to support these hearing implant recipients with varying goals in their pursuit of music. So we're joined today by Johanna Boyer and Chris Rocca. Johanna is going to be speaking to us about her approach to counseling individuals and providing tips and strategies to maximize benefit from music therapy or exercises. And then Chris will be discussing her work with music training with adults that is being done remotely. Okay, so before we get started, just so that it's a more smooth experience for you, please go ahead and make sure that your screen name has your name, or your screen display has your full name on it. If not, you can go to the participant panel, find yourself, and then click on more and rename yourself, putting in your full name. You could also put in your organization or your country if you would like to. To make it a little bit easier to avoid background noise, please mute your microphone and mute your phones so we can really hear the speakers. And then for a more stable internet connection on your side, we would recommend that you close all other programs on your device. And then please, as I mentioned earlier, if you have any comments or questions, to type them in the chat, because we do have time at the end that we really want to be able to chat with our experts and have them answer some of our questions. Okay. And then if you would like English captioning, that is available. So at the bottom, there's a button on the bottom of your screen. Just click on closed caption and you'll get closed captioning in English. Okay. So I kind of told you already, I am a little bit older, so I started therapy maybe about 30 years ago when cochlear implants were coming around. And when I was working with children and adults, I was very focused with the children on developing their listening and their verbal language skills, or with adults, I was really focusing on getting them to relearn to listen. And I didn't think about music very much. With children, I would use nursery rhymes and some songs in therapy, but I was doing that to help build their language. And I didn't really think about music as a goal to teach them to appreciate music or to learn how to play an instrument. And we know that that has certainly changed over time. So I'm really excited to have Johanna and Chris join us today to address this topic of music, because we know that recipients can and do benefit greatly in a variety of ways from music training, so that music training should be just as much of a goal in therapy as is developing kind of the listening and those language skills in children, or the listening skills in adults. So with that in mind, I do have two Menti questions for you. Okay, so we'll bring up the slide. And you can go to menti.com. There's two ways you can do this. So the first is you could just take your phone and hold the camera over the QR code, and that will take you to our poll. Or you can open up another internet browser and go to www.menti.com and then put in the code. So I'll give you a couple seconds to go ahead and get that sorted out. So again, you can either use the camera on your phone to put over the QR code and it'll take you to our questions, or the menti.com, and the code is 4700-9955. Again, the code is 4700-9955. So we'll give you a second to go ahead and get to that. So, all right, so you're already there. First question. Have you ever had any hearing technology recipient ask you about music? Okay. So I'll give a few more seconds here for people to answer. And we see more in the response that the majority of people are saying yes, that CI or hearing technology recipients are interested about music. So that's fantastic. This is the perfect topic for you to be joining in on today. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to our second question. So second question is, do you ever discuss music training of any form, either that you're doing it or that they're doing music training on their own or by another professional? So do you ever discuss music training of any form with your hearing technology recipients? Okay, and I think I kind of told you my answer. You know, when I first started that, I would have said no, I never talked about music training. But things have changed, technology's come a long way, and we see quite a few do. That's fantastic that you're bringing it up. And a little bit more, maybe 10 to 15%, are not bringing it up. So hopefully after today's presentation, you'll feel more comfortable of bringing up music training as a topic and something that you want to work on in therapy. Okay, so we're gonna close down the Menti and get back to our presentation. All right, so with that in mind, I would like to go ahead and start with our first speaker today. So I want to introduce Johanna Boyer. Johanna is a musicologist and research associate with MED-EL since 2012. Her work focuses on the topic music and cochlear implants as it relates to research, rehabilitation, education, and awareness. She's based in the U.S. or the United States office in North Carolina and is a member of the North American Research Laboratory, where she conducts music research. She earned her MA in musicology with the minor subjects in music education and sociology from the university in Würzburg, Germany. Her musical education focused on performance as a singer. Her experiences in this particular area include professional performances, teaching, as well as extensive work with choirs. So thank you, Johanna, for joining us today to share your experiences and knowledge with us. So can you please go ahead and start your screen share?
Yes. Hello. Just let me. Okay. I hope you all see now my presentation. Mary
Yes.
Kay.
Yes, we see that.
Great. So thank you, Mary Kay, for the introduction and for having me here. And thank you to you all for joining us today. I first discovered and learned about cochlear implants about 12 years ago, and then joined MED-EL, as Mary Kay said, in 2012. And as a musicologist, I have been focusing solely on music ever since, which is really very rewarding work. One area of importance to MED-EL and me personally is music rehabilitation. Music enjoyment has become almost a demand from many cochlear implant users, and the interest in music training is high, I would say. But many cochlear implant users also report that music rehabilitation is a challenge because it's not so easy to find the suitable training resources. They don't know really where to start. And they say that they stall because they don't know how to practice. So based on my interactions with cochlear implant candidates and users, which are mainly adults, I would like to share today how I support and counsel them in regard to music rehabilitation. So I'm in contact with many users. They send me their questions, and then we often start a dialogue about music rehabilitation, either over email, the phone, Skype, and sometimes also in person. And so now I would like to start by sharing typical questions I receive from candidates and users. So on the one side, I receive many general broad questions like, what is the best approach to successfully retrain music? On the other side, there are also many questions that are very specific, that are often coming from musicians, like how accurate will my intonation be? Intonation here refers to the accuracy of pitch in playing or singing. So in terms of perception, in terms of performance, of course, perception still plays a role, since this is like a loop working together. Here we have another few questions, very coming from professional musicians that either teach or play in an orchestra. I understand that might be not your typical patient pool, but I receive all those questions from the musicians, of course, also from non-musicians, people who are interested in music and want to improve their music enjoyment. But also the professional musicians come to me and ask these types of questions. And then with the expanding indications in the cochlear implant field, there are more and more recipients with residual hearing. And there are some important considerations I will point out just in a few seconds. So you see, in summary, a few questions that I often receive, but I also would be very interested to hear any questions you receive from your patients about music and music rehabilitation particularly. So please think about a music-related question that you've received in the past and share it in the chat. And I hope that we will have some time to talk about those later. Okay, so in general, when I answer those questions and start a dialogue about music rehabilitation, there are 5 important aspects I typically point out and talk about. So generally just the importance of music training. You need to put in the effort and practice. And that might sound very simple, but that was something that wasn't really talked about, at least 12 years ago when I started in this field. Then when it comes to music, and I think this is more so than with improvements in speech, it takes time. Improvements take time. And so it's very important to talk about expectations. I've had, professional musicians that are willing to practice 7 hours a day, but also then want a very solid outcome after a month. And that's not always how it works with cochlear implants, depending on what their goal is. And then we have, you don't have to wait to start practicing music. When I first started in the field, there was this notion of waiting with music, letting them have more experience with the cochlear implant, which generally I understand. Of course, there are many things to learn and we don't want to overwhelm them. But I think if music is a priority to a cochlear implant user, then there's really nothing against starting right at the beginning. So if you're interested in music, you don't have to wait to practice music. And then something I talk about to focus on your cochlear implant alone is something that's particularly important for our cochlear implant users with residual hearing, so our SSD users or bimodal users. It is really important to, directly connect your audio processor with the sound source to do the practice, because otherwise your residual hearing or your normal hearing, other ear, is just too dominant, the bone conduction to take over. So that is something I really point out to everyone. And then another thing I talk about is the importance of 2 ears. Pitch perception is much more stable and nuances perceivable with 2 ears. And I see that especially in new SSD users. For example, I worked with a drummer together who had lost the confidence in rhythm perception. due to the loss of binaural hearing. Of course, rhythm is something in general that is not so difficult for cochlear implant user, but a drummer is much more sensitive to the nuances in rhythm. And so he experienced over time after cochlear implantation, after 3 months, 6 months, the improvements and how both ears are working together and gaining back his confidence in his performance. So when I then move on in counseling cochlear implant users in terms of music rehabilitation, when they're interested in really specific tasks, then I typically talk about 3 types of music training and the relevant resources. And this is focused music listening, music ear training, and a music performance training. And I will go into those in detail. I also always point out the Medell blog, where they can find tips and tricks, but also guest articles from other cochlear implant recipients that share their experiences, which include their struggles and their successes. And I think that this is really motivating. And I believe Julia will share the link to the Medell blog in the chat with you, if you haven't heard about it already. So when I first talk about focused music listening with cochlear implant users, I share our resource Music Tips for Adults, which is a free download, and Julia will also share the link to the download. And in this resource, the recipient gets more information, detailed information about music listening and music selection. And I've here listed the main themes, but I will not go too much into detail. But if you want more information on that, you can get the resource and of course share this with your patients. I understand that when music doesn't sound pleasing, that the motivation to listen to music is low. So I typically give them some additional tasks to do when listening to music, like write down what you hear, get specific. How does it sound to you? And also ask yourself those questions over time, over the course of your music training, so you can keep track of your progress. Sometimes cochlear implant users don't really realize the progress they've already made. So I think I try to point that out to them to further motivate them to keep going with the practice. And if they don't know where to start when it comes to music listening, then I share our Medell Spotify playlists with them, which were created for CI users, keeping the challenges they're facing in mind. And for that, you just simply have to go to Spotify. So now I want to talk about music ear training. And you might think that music ear training is more relevant for musicians who want to play their instrument or improve their intonation, or maybe the motivated music lover that wants to perceive more nuances. But generally, music ear training will help to improve perception of relevant music parameters. And this way help you really with such a complex signal as music. So music ear training, in other words, is music perception and discrimination training. And pitch discrimination is probably the most important one to practice, so that the pitch cues become more reliable and salient. And this is not just about intervals and semitones, but also about complex pitch tasks and chords, and in the end, harmony perception. We are a world of apps, and there are really many benefits of using apps and online programs because they are motivating and engaging typically, and self-enabling because they allow for an individual schedule and they often allow the user to keep track of their own progress. And if you want to learn more about other apps, of course, as I said, there are pitch apps, but there are also interesting apps to help you with lyrics or singing. Then please check out an article I wrote a while ago about various music training apps that you will find on the MED-EL blog. And Julia will share the link in the chat if you want to check out that article. Okay, music performance is the last of the three I want to talk about. And active music engagement through performance or music making is quite effective in music training. So it's something I strongly encourage. For former musicians, that might be their instrument, or if they are singers, to kind of get back into singing. It's interesting that many cochlear implant users prefer the sound of their instrument after practicing with it for a while, which I think supports the theory that training improves the perception and enjoyment. So typically musicians know how to practice their instrument or might work with a teacher, but also non-musicians can be musically active. So unfortunately, there are only, I think, few music therapists that are part of a clinic. But if your patients have the chance to use that, that is great. But I've also seen clinics offer music events to engage them in music activities. And if that's something you're interested in, then also please reach out to me. I've worked with clinics in the past to offer some of those programs. And there are sometimes also active music groups, particularly for hearing impaired. Like here in the US, we have the, let me think, it was a really long acronym, American Adults of Musicians with Hearing Loss. And they sometimes meet up and do music together. Of course, now we're kind of in COVID and in-person meetings are harder, but as you will hear from Chris, there are many professionals working and developing new remote and online programs to bridge that gap. I'm now at the end of my presentation, and I thought I would be nice to share an individual case. If we still have time, 2 minutes maybe. Mary Kay? I saw you.
Nodding.
Okay, thank you, perfect. Yeah, so I thought it would be nice to share an individual case. I was contacted by a bimodal cochlear implant user with a music background. And I used the Munich Music Questionnaire to further evaluate motivation, preferences, the background more in detail. And so for this user, and that's why I'm sharing this case, was really to improve music enjoyment. And she was interested in homework. Basically, she asked me to give her assignments. And I thought, sure, I can do that. So at first I asked her to listen to some songs and describe them and send me her descriptions. And what I learned was that generally the vocals and the lyrics were clear to her and she understood, could follow, but the instruments were blurred and she had more difficulties in the mid and high pitch range. From that point on, I gave her another assignment that focused on music listening exercises, and I asked her to practice 4 times a week for 30 minutes. And here's just a little outline. So one day focused on single instrument, another on vocals, the third one on genres, and then also we included some symphonic music. My first goal was to motivate her to practice and listen to music to continue that, even though some of it didn't sound pleasant. So even though her main difficulties were in the mid and high range, we kind of started with the lows, like starting with what is more fun at the moment to her. Another goal was that I said was to explore music. So in that case, for example, listen to some genres she hadn't listened to for a while. And I asked her to particularly to pick 3 songs from each of the genres she was listening to. And then also to explore different vocal and instrumental timbres. So by listening to different male singers to really concentrate on basically the differences between, or what makes that timbre special. Or in case of the instrumental timbre with symphonic music, particularly the example of Peter and the Wolf, where the instruments are being introduced at the beginning of the piece. You really hear one instrument at a time, and they all have a certain motive, which throughout the piece you can, recognize again. And as I've mentioned already prior, when it comes to really the details of the listening exercises, I typically ask them to close their eyes and listen to the music with only your cochlear implant for 10 minutes. Write down how it sounded to you, what you liked, what you disliked, and then listen again for this particular bimodal user with both. Also listen with your cochlear implant and your hearing aid together, and kind of learn from that experience and go back and forth. Of course, I could go on and on about these examples, but I want to get now to an end. And I thank you so much for your attention, and I hope to answer some questions later, but I'll give it back to you, Mary Kay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Johanna. I really appreciate kind of reviewing the basic aspects of music therapy, and then the types of music training, and then really giving us some practical tips. The case study really shows, like, here are some particular goals and activities that you can do. And I'm sure we could spend all day having you give us all kinds of these ideas. But we do want to get on to our next expert, because I think she has a lot of great information to share with us also. So if you have questions, please type them in the chat. We will get to them at the end of the presentations. We'll have more time to focus on those. So with that, I want to introduce our next speaker, who is Chris Rocca. She's a senior rehabilitation specialist on the adult and children's cochlear implant teams at St. Thomas Hospital in London. She has research publications, contributed to book chapters, and has presented internationally on the topic of music. Chris has worked with cochlear implant centers around the world to integrate music as an integral part of the rehabilitation process from babies on through adults. She's designed a number of music-focused support resources for families, children, and adults, and recent developments have included the newly launched Learning Through Music section on the Elizabeth Foundation's Let's Listen and Talk online telehealth resource for families and rehabilitation professionals, which was developed with the support of families during the lockdown in the United Kingdom. So she is here and going to be discussing this new recent development. So Chris, can you please go ahead and share your screen?
Hi, can you see that okay, Mary Kay?
Perfect. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, welcome everybody this afternoon. Welcome to a bedroom in the house. So all the strange places to present from. So I'd like to talk this afternoon about the work we're doing in adults at St. Thomas's, and particularly the fact that since obviously the change, we've been working entirely remotely. So why rehabilitation groups? Well, at St Thomas here, as you can see, we have introduced and had groups as part of the rehabilitation support for adults for quite a considerable time. And I think the key reason of that is the impact we see on the outcomes. We have a range of adult provision where music actually is integrated in lots of these different kind of groups in their approach, but specifically in terms of music, we offer sort of a music group as such. We also offer individual music support, particularly to musicians who have had cochlear implants or people who have a very high and strong interest in playing an instrument generally. So this is our range in terms of adult provision. So why music? Well, the impact of music is really important, and evidence and research shows that for adults, despite the fact that the sound can often be initially quite disappointing, in terms of quality of life, it is incredibly important to many, many adults. We know that active participation can really help in that adjustment and changing to the sound. Some training we know has given some impact, but actually it's a difference between training versus the motivational aspect of an adult to re-engage and sort of create for themselves in a more person-centered approach in how they might reconnect and learn to listen to music. And I think, as Johanna mentioned, the expectation is hugely important, that expectation counselling before they have the cochlear implant, and really how that impacts as they then begin to progress afterwards. For some, they can get real outcomes in terms of musical elements, musical contour, instruments, everything connected around music. But I think what's also really important is those non-musical aspects, that actually it can enhance listening in noise, it can help with localization. And one of the real importance is around that emotional inference. And it's the emotional inference in the voice, the musical aspects of our speech that are also really impacted and very valuable in terms of what comes through their involvement in music. So since COVID, everything has gone remote. All our groups used to be face-to-face, and now all our groups are 100% virtual. The practicalities of that, we have a wide demographic from people in their 20s up to people in their 90s. So the technology, you have to work with what's there. Some people have only got phones, some people have their laptops. Some of the wireless aspects of that are integrated into that and access. But the sound quality really matters, and really be able to listen and work with people to understand how they're experiencing music remotely is very important. The length of the session is slightly altered because it's a long time to be listening if you're on a call. And the number of people on the call is also important, because what we're really doing through this in our groups is really getting the interaction, the listening, the connection, and the conversation across with the adults to really engage them. Some of the adults, particularly those elderly adults, are often living on their own. They may not have the opportunity to speak to other people. So this is their real connection in terms of that, and real use of their cochlear implant. In terms of the content, we've maintained the content. We're really focused there on the musical brain, that musical memory, which we know has such an impact for adults, how they interplay that with musical elements, and then obviously in relation to the technology. And we create, and I think again, it's that much more person-centered approach, even though you're working within a group, is they create their own sort of personal takeaway at the end of that, what they're going to work on, their own goals around that. What we don't do is what I'm doing now, is a continuous PowerPoint presentation. So we drop slides, we show a couple of visuals, bring it down, and people can all see each other. We may use captions, but actually what we also want to do is the encouragement of the listening during that. So continuous PowerPoints we tend to avoid now. I'm very fortunate to work with a very broad and wide and experienced team in St Thomas's. So when we've run our groups, we run them in pairs. So this allows one person to really be focused and engaged and listening and talking with the adults, particularly in music, because we want to dance, we want to move, we want to get really active, not just a passive listening part of that. So I think having paired aspects of that between our team is very, very fortunate. So I want to try a few things just to give you a flavour, really, I suppose, of some of the elements in that and how we've changed. We've had to create some real bite-size or use bite-sized parts of music where we know the impact from their side is going to be doing what we want. So in this case, one of the foundations is to get back to that basic beat of music. And this can be as simple as complex as you like. And we encourage people to tap along or dance or move, and really just can they experience the beat. So however you feel, do participate. Here's a quick sample of this. marvelous. I can see Mary Kay dancing. If you're all sitting still, never mind, maybe this will catch you. So what we want to do is get the conversation going around all the elements of music. How we do it now is to get, again, designed bite size, where we've got the same piece played in different ways, and you're going to discuss that contrast. So I'll just show you in relation to pitch. This is an example of this. The first one. Okay, and version 2. Okay, so hopefully you can hear that difference, and what that lends itself to is not just the discussion around pitch and depth in the musical quality, but also the use of your contralateral hearing aid or having residual hearing and the impact technology can make. But we're trying to get that through a musical discussion to get the adults to listen, analyze, and engage in that conversation together. The same happens if we're talking about instruments. We can use some visuals on the screen, which helps. And often we talk around in those initial stages where they might hear the mechanism of the instrument before the actual sound. So in this case, just the double bass. And again, these bite-sized pieces of music. And then we can extend that into lots of very short listening exercises. I'm not going to play this one, but I thought visually to show it to you. Here we're really focusing our attention. It's that sustained attention for real listening in noise development. So you have the one key instrument, like at the top here, that continues to play a rhythm. And gradually these other instruments join. And we listen on a simple level. Can you hear at what point they come in? And we go back and re-listen again. So it's not a test, but we're looking at encouraging people that you listen once and then you listen again. And that re-listening really is what's going to get that development and that connection back to reconnecting to the timbral elements, but actually how do they come in? We can make that more complicated by, can you match the rhythm? Can we enter them in different sequences? So we can change the timbre of that, make it voices, make it just strings. So we have a whole range of development in terms of those kind of exercises. Using visuals really important in terms of that, so we can actually follow scores. We can use a pointer so that we can track a melody, and we can get, so working with musicians where we want to get really into the complex element of the melodic contour or the harmony, we can then talk musically together, but also we encourage people afterwards to go and do karaoke, to go and listen on YouTube and to play. And the final part of this I want to focus on is this emotional inference. So when you often have your implant, how you monitor your own voice, do you understand how loudly you're projecting? Are you sort of talking very quietly? The emotional inference in the voice. So we can do lots of games around that as we do on the remote using our voice, but equally we want to understand how does the music convey that? How is the musical emotion coming through? And one of the simplest way we do this to start with is using silent movies. And here you have to match the little extract you get to one of the scenes. So it could be the love at number 1 or the fast car race at track at number 3 or suspense on number 5 as you hang off the clock. But have a listen and see which one you think this might be. Okay, so hopefully, and our adults would be either putting up 3 fingers or 1 or 6, depending on what they think it is. Hopefully you thought that was 3, and you'd probably say, well, I can get that through the rhythm and the tempo, and you're absolutely right. We can then move that up by here, and I'll just play one example of this. You've got love in picture number 1 and sadness in 2. And this is this major minor quality that we often start to train, and it's quite a standard way of doing this. Here, this piece of music is exactly the same. The rhythm's the same, the melodic line is the same, except for the semitone contrast. So they would hear something like this. And we'd actually have a bit of a debate. Is that sad? Is that love? And so that conversation around that and that interplay allows that real listening and analysis to come through. And this really leads into song and the voice and the emotion that comes through the lyrics and on the way that we project. On the one side, you can see a very typical hierarchy in engaging back to the lyrics in song. detecting a phrase, being able to sing along with that, to be able to get that discrimination coming. On the right hand side, the importance of using unaccompanied. So we sing unaccompanied, we then have a separate single instrument maybe, followed by a small ensemble. So the complexity rises, and we have many adults now, and it's been great. And in fact, they're quite keen to have a choir. So I think that's our next aspect we might do. We pick songs that may have musical memory connections, or example here, the let it snow, let it snow, let it snow, this phrase, highly repetitive, but actually also has that descending in pitch. And I just want to give you a quick flavor of that, because the other thing we've had to do is adapt in terms of remote is the balance between the accompaniment and the voice to make sure that perception really comes through clearly. So I'll just give you a phrase, and do join in on the let it snow.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. And since we've no place to go, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.
Marvelous. So what we find is we need on remote to do quite a lot of the conversation to make sure it's not on PowerPoint, but then to do exercises that are very short, very focused, so we can keep people really listening and engaged, and sort of quick quizzes can also help. So we've also integrated into the groups lots of music aspects. For example, again, here they have to listen to the example, which is the theme tune from a very old radio shows, and they guess, and we talk around which one that might be. We use the voice, and they listen to something historical in terms of a political piece, or something that the quality of the voice really matters. And again, being able to identify that sport, the emotion in the voice at sport, and we come through the decades in terms of that right up to the present day. And then lockdown, one sound that's been, I think, for everybody in the beauty of the silence that we have. So have a listen and see if you can hear this piece. And it's the dawn chorus. We don't get people to identify the birds, but that bird song. And that's one of the things often when people obviously comment on quite a lot when they first had their implants. So again, we're working with people who've recently had their implants through to people who maybe had them for 3 months, 6 months, and up to 1 year. So at different levels in terms of their experience. Monitoring outcomes is really important, and the piece we've adapted, in fact, because it's quite long, is this by, it was at Southampton with Rachel Van Besco there, and a really good outcomes piece, so well worth having a look at that. We have that alongside GAST, which is our quality of life questionnaire, which we use pre and post. And as I said, we create and encourage that sort of very person-centered individual musical takeaway rather than lots of information. We send often the MP3s through so that they can re-listen to those and use those again. So in terms of some outcomes, in change from going face-to-face to remote, now our virtual groups are 100% remotely delivered. And in terms of those outcomes, you can see here the pretty strong, I think, in terms of that engagement through this difference, I suppose, in the way of having to deliver, and what they would feel that they would get from the session as opposed to being that face-to-face. Where it's been not good, or to some extent not as helpful, often that's the challenges around the wireless situation as well, or they may just be trying to listen off a mobile phone, which is really difficult in terms of that. So some of those people we've been able to then go back and maybe do an individual session or something to give further support in terms of that. In terms of the music though, that's continued to be very positive. I think people feel engaged with that. And I think the main part of that is they feel motivated. And that, I think, is the key point of working and being able to give people that motivation to get back to their music, to relearn to listen, and to give themselves those sort of short-term goals to work on. So moving forward, well, I think we'll be continuing with remote music groups and individual sessions. We hope to develop some more support resources, some of the ones I've sort of demonstrated today, to really enhance and to make sure that we can really begin to support adults at different levels of their musicality presentation. And yeah, to really audit that service and to make sure that what we feel from adults' perspective is important, and to really make sure that we continue to improve our delivery. Thank you.
Okay. Chris, thank you. You know, I really appreciate the review of the research that you've done and why working on music is important, and what we might be able to expect from cochlear implant recipients or hearing technology recipients. Very impressed that you were able to take this music program and turn it into online. I'm sure that was a bit challenging, but very impressed, and really that you could still continue to provide it to individuals during this lockdown, and found it helpful and rather enjoyed your walking us through the different activities in the program. So I see there's a few questions, but we're going to wait for a second. We have a tradition here at Experts Online, and we would like to take a group photo. So if everybody can turn their cameras on, or their videos on, should say, we'll all fix our hair and then do a lovely smile. Getting ready and set. I'll give you a countdown in just a second, so we don't all sit there with our frozen smiles in place. Yulia, will you let us know when? Give me a countdown to 3. All right, 3, 2, 1. Yay, we got the photo. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. So at this point then, we would like to open it up. We have a few minutes here to some questions from the attendees. And I see that Mary Beth has a question for Chris. What is the best number of people in a virtual group? She'd love to participate in virtual sessions, as would I. I could really use it, and I don't even have hearing technology, but I could use some music training. She says they wish they were offered in the US. Sounds fabulous. So what is the best number of people in a virtual group?
Yeah, we've explored this, and I think that's the advantages of having 2 people. Because, and just if someone's doing the slides view or the visuals, because that enables you to engage with the group. I think, again, it's what's your expectation objective of your group. So when we want real interactive discussion and listening, we've had probably up to 6 engaged in that, where we really want them to listen, be able to have the to and fro and that conversation around that. But we've equally had musical extracts where we've had up to 25 online. There, we're not looking for that interaction in the same way. We're looking at a bigger engagement and a listening kind of activity. So it just depends on the objective of what you want within the group. But I think it lends itself quite well in terms of that to small focus group and to a larger listening activity.
Okay, great.
Sure.
So
I'm sure also Chris will be a great, Chris program, or the program she just introduced, will be a great model for other countries, other centers to pick up.
Okay. And one other comment was that you made me and my colleagues sing, which I think is funny. But to me, it just says how enjoyable it is kind of to work on music training and kind of fun activities, rather than, some of the more difficult listening tasks that adults have to do when they're learning to use their hearing technology. That doing music training can be actually quite fun. Okay, so so we have another question. So we run music groups for young adults online, and found it motivating for the participants. And they want to know, how do you choose the music pieces? Is it based on participant preferences or cultural aspects?
Yeah, so
choose?
It's a mixture of that. So we want to do a mixture of familiar and unfamiliar, because we don't want people to be guessing the music. We want them sometimes to be really focused on listening and analysing the music. So it's always been really important to have familiar and unfamiliar music in terms of that. So that often will guide us. We're really guided by the hierarchy of how much complexity in terms of accompaniment behind there. Also in terms of, if we're driving a rhythm, we know that's going to really give a strong foundation and build build on the top of that. So I think there's quite a lot of thought goes into how we use those. And when we went remote, what was really essential is we had to play it to each other at a distance to actually see, because technology, Zoom and MS Teams, we did find MS Teams was better. Often the music would condense, run very quickly, and then eke out. So their whole experience was a bit chaotic anyway. So we spent a lot of time working with the technology in our team and just thinking around musical extracts. And to be honest, we compose and create a lot of those.
Okay, really good information to know, and interesting about what kind of platform was more preferable for you to use.
Yeah, and it's not to say, and I think Zoom can be as good, but it's worth just trialing that and just experimenting a bit with that.
Okay, let me see, chat. Do we have any other questions? Because I do have a question. So if anybody has a burning question, you better type it in now. So I'm going to go ahead and ask, and maybe you can expand on this just a little bit. So I know that using music with children, besides being fun and interesting, it's been shown to be beneficial for them for also developing language. Does music therapy for adults provide any additional benefits beyond music appreciation or just some particular listening skills?
Yeah, so from our side, I think this is a real growing area. And I think if we think about in all our centres now, we have a high proportion of elderly adults who may be experiencing some level of cognitive decline, or even those with dementia. And there's a growing body of evidence in terms of music and the impact that can have on cognition, but also in executive functioning for adults, particularly in the area of sort of episodic memory, short-term memory, being able to inhibit and also to plan. So I think music can have real impact for those adults really who may be experiencing sort of challenges really in their cognitive functioning. And yeah, there's an increasing body of evidence of music that shows that music can impact on that. And I think it's something certainly in our field we need to be more and more engaged with. And ways of working. So we've started to do that within our team, and again, remote at the moment, and working really thinking around a multi-sensory approach to be able to support those adults and adults who still may be getting implants, who may have some level of cognitive decline, because as we know, the key importance of hearing health so important for all aspects. So yeah, so music has played, and I think will play a stronger part in this moving forward.
Wow, that's really interesting. Because I know with older adults, we do talk about adding in cognitive therapy with that. Johanna, did you have any comments or that you wanted to add to that question about additional benefits?
Yeah, definitely. So in the past 2 years, I conducted a study here in the North American Research Laboratory using a basically online music training program with adults. And I think, this very comprehensive program doesn't just work on discrimination skills, but also on memory and attention. And you really see that with the elderly participants that maybe in a lower level, you can see they can discriminate two chords. But if you then play, maybe 3 different chords 4 times, and they have to memorize the order, then it gets really difficult. It's where really the attention is asked and memory. And so, I think programs like that will provide additional benefits to improve these skills.
Fantastic. The more tools that we have and the more we can work with the whole adult, not just the listening, but working on listening and cognition and language, the better. So we do have 2 more questions, and I apologize if I get the name wrong. Razia is asking, with this regard, what's the best time to start music therapy? Either one of you want to jump in?
First?
Yeah. in terms of adults, I think so in our work at St Thomas's, we tend to give the adult just time to settle down once they've been activated. So it might be, we generally see them just before 3 months, but earlier than that, it might be sort of 2. But I think I think initially adults need to just adjust to that sound and get the confidence around the use of their technology. But I think as soon as possible, we don't tend to wait for a great length. I think it's better to do it sooner. I think Johanna and I probably agree. Before, people waited quite a while. Now I would say it's better to engage and to really get that connection with the brain as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've worked with musicians that say, I can't wait 3 months and not practice my instrument. So they go right back in. And I generally also say that you don't have to wait with music. But as Chris pointed out, of course, there are many other things to learn and to experience. So, of course, to give them some time to settle in, that's understandable.
Okay. And I think also I'd say that some musicians actually just find it too painful to go back to their instrument. And so that could be something that takes much, much longer, in fact, for some people, that it just is such a difference. It is so distorted that for them,
well, I think
that expectation, it just takes time. So I think it's quite person focused as well, really.
Absolutely. I think also with musicians, it's a forth and back. And maybe even with non-musicians, they have the motivation, they try it out. They might have a negative experience at the beginning, and that discourages them. And maybe then something else, they go along, they make other experiences, and then go back in and see if something has changed. So it's not a gradual way. It's sometimes an up and down.
Okay. So we have time for one more question. So Mary Beth said that she's noticed that as her listening to music with cochlear implants has advanced, so has her listening to speech in noise. So have you noticed that connection in others?
Yes, so there's been some nice evidence as well, some papers around that. Nina Kraus has done some nice work on that with outcomes with listening in noise. There's also quite a few studies around musicians and their ability to listen in noise. And I think it's that attentional focus that you're listening within a complexity of sound, but you're really focusing on one instrumental area. And so some of those activities that we try and introduce where we have the range of the instruments, and I think they're quite easy to make in a sense. You could do it, we also do it off your voice notes on your phone and make some of those kind of examples. But I think those can help, because what you're really doing there is that executive functioning, isn't it? It's being able to completely focus in one area and not be drawn in by the distraction, but it's also overhearing something coming in. So it's musical activities really in a sense that can help with that. And also, I suppose, singing, you're focused on the voice and the lyrics. And again, being able to just maybe not always get distracted by the accompaniment with it. So yes, I think it's has been shown to be beneficial.
Yeah, and the research Chris mentioned, I think, there's a great body in normal hearing individuals with musicians and so on. But there are also a few studies with cochlear implant users, like study from Sunnybrook, where speech understanding and noise improved significantly after the music training. And I think, it's always more research needed to better understand what is maybe the best approach and how can we be most effective for certain transfer effects, like to the speech domain.
Yeah, just, music therapy is fun, and look at all the different benefits that you're getting from it, which is great. Just really quick, one more question, because I think it's an important one from Razia. So the question is, are there any audiological limitations to being exposed to musical instruments, and meaning like in terms of levels of loudness?
I can't say in terms of loudness, because that's controlled in a sense around that. I mean, you could open an IDR and get more information coming through in terms of that. I mean, I think musical programs have their strengths and weaknesses, and in terms of the technology, I haven't. I mean, I think adults sometimes will report if there's a certain particular pitch or timbre that they're not uncomfortable with, and that's managed audiologically when they go into clinic.
Okay.
Again, personally, there's nothing that's ever resonated as that as not. Actually, what I find is the opposite of that. It's actually knowing the instruments which are the most impactful, and instruments that will give better presentation in terms of pitch. For example, a keyboard where you haven't got the harmonics versus a piano. So some of use of instruments can also really help, I think, in terms of that. But audiologically, no, I would say it's we work with the strengths and the limitations, I think, of the technology.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think there are preferences when it comes to instruments, and maybe somebody who had a high frequency loss, you know, for the longest, might not have a preference for higher pitched instruments and found them awful. And, you know, so eventually you want to work your way back there. Eventually you have to, you need to want to face it.
So yeah, I'd agree. So if you didn't like the sort of the bagpipes before you had an implant, you're probably not going to like them afterwards either. So, you know.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. So with that, I think we are now coming to the end of our session. So I would like to thank our expert speakers, Johanna Boyer and Chris Rocca, for presenting and sharing their expertise and their experiences and knowledge with us today. I hope for those of you who have joined us that you found this Experts Online to be interesting and practical. I think I certainly have ideas of some music activities that I could incorporate into a therapy session, or actually music goals that I could incorporate into a therapy session. So I'd like to give a huge thank you to our experts and to all of you for joining us. And I would like to invite you to return again after our summer break. So our next Experts Online is going to be in September, same place, same time. So September 8th, again, same time here, and it's going to be on cochlear implants in infants, which is another great topic. So thank you again, everyone, and we will see you next time.